Chess YouTube, welcome back. In today's video, we are looking at the grand finals of the 2025 Freestyle Chess Grand Slam tournament. And of course, the most important game of today is Magnus versus Hikaru. These two players are facing off for first and second place. They played their first game today. Their second game in classical time controls rather, will be played tomorrow. But of course, we're also looking at 4 other games that were played today in this tournament. We have Vincent Keymer and Fabiano Caruana facing off for 3rd and 4th place, and a bunch of other players facing off for 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th place, including the Indian superstars Arjun Erigaisi and my favorite chess player right now, Praggnanandhaa. It's no secret I have a huge, I don't want to say crush on Praggnanandhaa, but he is my favorite player right now. That guy is an absolute savage at the board, but more on that in a minute. For right now, let's dive right into game number 1 featuring Magnus and Hikaru. All right, in game 1 here, what's the main feature of this position? As you all know, in freestyle chess, all of the pieces on the first rank are shuffled around. The main feature here is probably the queens and the bishops being in the corners of the board. That will make for some very interesting ideas if either side moves their B pawns or their G pawns. Now, in this position, 1 C4, D4, and G4 are the top engine lines. Magnus opens 1 C4 in the spirit of the English opening, a very logical idea. And here Black does the exact same thing, 1 C5. Now here Magnus continues, Knight C3, Knight C6, Knight F3, very logical so far. And here, Black is the first one to mix things up. In this position, Hikaru Nakamura, he goes for the move E5, gaining space in the center of the board, a very interesting choice, sort of in the spirit of certain lines of the English opening after, say, Knight F3, C4, and Knight C3. All right, now here, Magnus, what should he be doing? Well, as usual, the computer finds some insane ideas, including Knight G5 followed by Queen B1, trying to pressure the pawn on H7. Absolutely nuts. Instead, Magnus plays what looks like a temporary pawn sacrifice, the move B4. Okay, what the heck is the idea here? What is going on? Well, it's very simple. If Black takes on B4, White is going to jump up with the knight to the D5 square, opening up the attack of the queen on this pawn, and also this knight will then swoop around and also target this weak pawn. And if Black takes with the knight instead, then the pawn on E5 hangs immediately. So Magnus finding a really creative way to attack on the flank and put pressure on Black's very important pawn on the C5 square. So which of those options does Hikaru go for? Well, in the game, Hikaru, he takes the pawn on B4 with the knight. Okay, fair enough. Very logical move. And here Magnus jumps in and wins this pawn. That was the entire idea of that line, of course. All right, now here, Hikaru, G6 is the move. The point being is opening up the attack on the knight. And beyond that, this bishop has some X-ray pressure on the queen on A1. You can imagine if these knights were to disappear for some reason, the bishop would be attacking the queen. Therefore, Magnus will have to worry about that for quite a while. So what does Magnus do? Well, he actually ignores that potential threat and just goes D4, trying to open up the center of the board. And it turns out this move is incredibly strong. What does Hikaru do? Well, here Hikaru, he ignores all of the tension here and he just castles his king. Now Magnus, all right. Do you take on C5? Well, if you do that, you lose the knight. Therefore, here Magnus, he drops his knight back to G4. And look at this. Yes, this move G6 makes a lot of sense. It's very important to open up this bishop. However, Magnus finding this weird way to get his knight over here where it's pressuring these incredibly weak dark squares for the Black king. I mean, you can imagine this knight jumping into, say, F6 or even H6, pressuring the king. That would be very, very dangerous. So Hikaru, with that in mind, bishop G7 is the move, immediately blocking any sort of knight H6 idea. Of course, the knight can still go there as the bishop on C1 does control that square. However, Black could be able to knock off the knight immediately if he wanted to. And besides that, the king now has access to the H8 square if it needs it. All right, Magnus. Now, with his knight off E5, he takes the pawn on C5. Of course, this knight would be hanging on E5, but it's now on G4 instead of E5. And Hikaru, what does he do? Well, he counterattacks in the center with the move D5. A slightly shocking choice. I mean, after all, this pawn can be taken outright. However, Magnus instead, knight to H6, jumping in with the knight, pressuring the king. Now, of course, Black theoretically could take that knight on H6, but if he does, he loses his precious dark squared bishop here. He doesn't want to allow that. Therefore, king to H8 is the move played in the game. And here, Magnus plays another really bizarre idea, but it works, and if it works, it works. G4. Okay, what is Magnus doing here? Well, the idea, if you get this pawn to G5, theoretically, you now have this incredible clamp on these dark squares around the king. And of course, the pawn is being supported by the rook, which really does help Magnus quite a bit here. Overall, here, Magnus just applying a tremendous amount of pressure. All right, Hikaru, bishop e6, supporting the pawn on d5, centralizing, getting another piece out, very logical. And now here, Magnus, the strongest move actually is queen to b2, pressuring this knight, trying to kick it off the square b4, where it does defend that pawn on the d5 square. Instead, though, c takes d5 played in the game. Now we have knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and then bishop takes d5. Now here, Magnus, bishop b2, finally relieving some of this x-ray pressure on this diagonal. Now, of course, if this knight were to move anywhere else, say, take the bishop, you don't lose the queen. And in fact, black may be losing his very important dark squared bishop there. All right, black, bishop e6, retreating the bishop, very logical, but Magnus g5 pressing on in this game. Now we have a trade of rooks, rook takes d1, and then queen takes d1, and then we have the move queen to c8, sliding over with the queen. All right, now Magnus, he sees he can actually lift his rook up to g3 and then over to d3 potentially, activating his rook, and that is what he does. Rook g3, a very creative move by the former world champion. Now black, queen takes c5, gobbling up that pawn, and here Magnus, he swoops in with his knight to the e4 square, knight to e4, and just look at this position. His knights jumping into these squares here, and in doing this, Magnus is actually exposing his bishop. However, he also has the attack on the queen on c5, and that allows him to get away with this idea. So a very simple tactical trick, which allows Magnus to swoop in and to create even more pressure with his knight. Now, Hikaru, queen d5. He slides the queen over. His goal, he wants these queens to come flying off the board. His argument is, if I get into an endgame against Magnus, maybe the attack will be over. Maybe the pressure will be relieved somewhat. But first of all, Hikaru is forgetting Magnus is the greatest endgame player of all time. Don't even try to argue that one with me, Chess YouTube. But secondly, Hikaru, maybe he knows this, maybe he doesn't, but the attack is not over with the queens off the board. These dark squares are so weak that Magnus is going to find a way to continue pressing even without the queens. Here's how it works. Queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now here, Magnus, he jumps in with the knight, finally infiltrating on that very, very weak f6 square, knight to f6. He jumps in, and look at this. In doing so, he's giving up that pawn on a2. Black gobbles it up, but then Magnus swoops over with the rook lift coming into play here, hits the bishop, and also has the other attack on the pawn on the a7 square. All right, black, bishop e6, he retreats. Rook takes a7, gobbling up that pawn, and then black goes knight to d6, defending b7 with his knight. So far, so good. But look at this. Even though material is even, both sides have the three minor pieces. In fact, black may be up in material due to his bishop pair, arguably. But the key factor here is this pressure on these dark squares and the king being locked out. It is just so difficult to unwind as black here. All right, Magnus, f3. What's the idea here? Well, it's sort of prophylaxis against this king. Magnus is trying to gain space. He has the 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the king side, and usually the side of the board where you have a pawn majority, you do want to push your pawns, especially in the endgame. But beyond that, he's also setting up e4 and guarding that e4 square, stopping knight to e4 idea. So Magnus finding a brilliant multi-purpose move again. All right, Hikaru, rook c8, trying to defend. Bishop e5, applying some pressure on that knight on the d6 square. Very, very good. Now the knight jumps over, knight to f5, and now we do have a trade of one pair of knights. Knight takes, bishop takes. But don't worry, this knight trade does not relieve the pressure at all. In fact, the pressure here on black is only just beginning. Here, Magnus, he gobbles up that pawn, rook takes b7, winning it outright, and now black goes back, bishop e6, he has to defend the pawn on the f7 square. All right, Magnus, he's got what he wants. He's got a clamp on f6. He's got a 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the king side. Hikaru is just a sitting duck here. It's like that duck hunt game from the original Nintendo where we had that giant, anyways, duck hunt game. It's like that. Hikaru is the sitting duck in that game. All right, rook b4. The rook slides back. Bishop takes f6. Bishop takes, and then king g8. Now, if you know your endgames, if you're in my chess course and you've learned endgames from me, by the way, free chess course, free chess community, free chess group coaching, go to the link in the description. I'd love to have you there. I'd love to teach you guys and have you be one of my, successful students and so on. But anyway, if you study endgames with me, you'll know opposite color bishops' endgames tend to be drawn. And the reason for that is these bishops can never, ever attack each other. And it's very easy to make some sort of fortress where one side cannot attack the other side's pawns. For example, right now, this bishop never, ever attacking these pawns, ever, ever, ever. And beyond that, this bishop on e6, it pretty much permanently defends f7. And therefore, this rook really can't ever pressure that pawn. However, there are always exceptions in chess, and in this position, the exception is coming from the fact that white has this incredible lockdown on the king side on the dark squares. This king is a sitting duck. If black's rook ever swoops down to anywhere else, white may have a mating idea, a back rank mate of rook b8, checkmating the king. And therefore, black always has to guard that. And meanwhile, white can slowly but surely push his pawns up. Let's see what Magnus can pull off here. All right, king f2, then rook c5. Of course, rook b8 is not a back rank mating threat yet, as rook c8 would defend for right now. But anyways, I digress. King g3, the king marches up. And now here, black knows if I sit around and wait, this is going to get really, really bad, really fast. White's going to push these pawns up, force back the bishop, maybe go h4, h5, h6, get that on lockdown. This is going to get really bad. So with that in mind, Hikaru, he finds both the strongest move on the board according to the engine and the best practical decision, which is to complicate the game with a pawn sacrifice h6. Hikaru giving up this pawn, white can take it outright, then go bishop g7 defending. That is a clean sacrifice of the pawn, and that is what happens. G takes king h7, then bishop g7. What is the idea? Why did Hikaru do this? Again, if Hikaru sat around and waited, he would be blown off the board. He would be squeezed like Magnus being a boa constrictor, just squeezing his prey. And with that in mind here, Hikaru trying to lash out, trying to get some sort of counterplay. And it continues, g5, gaining space. And actually, I quite like this. Maybe intending king g7, or king g6, sorry. And if white goes h7, you take the bishop and defend. All right, Hikaru finding some resources. e4, Magnus gains space, but then Hikaru f5, counterattacking on the king side. And now look at this. If white takes this pawn, suddenly white's remaining pawns on f3, my voice just cracked, my goodness. All right, h6 and h2 are going to be incredibly vulnerable. All right, rook b7, Magnus setting up all kinds of discovered attacks, including the very deadly rook d4 check, winning the rook as the king would be under check. Therefore, black has to respond, and black goes f4. A controversial move, very committal. Obviously, black is fixing his pawn structure. It's going to be hard to achieve a g4 break later, but he does drive back the king. And now, after rook c2, the king is driven back to the back rank. Obviously, you can't stay here, and you can't go forward as the f4 pawn controls those squares. So, king e1 played in the game. The king drops back. And here, Hikaru, as you can see by the eval bar, he has fought back in this game. He is just one move away from almost equalizing the game and having extremely good drawing chances. And what is that move? The move he has to play, it's very simple, is rook takes h2, just winning a pawn. It's a free pawn. You take the free pawn, but instead, bishop a2. Hikaru, he doesn't take this pawn. And Magnus, you don't have to give this guy two chances to win the game. In this position, he just goes bishop to f8. And in this position, the king is under check. White has a lot of threats. As you can see by the eval bar, it's skyrocketing. I mean, he's in the stratosphere right now. And Hikaru Nakamura, he resigns on the spot to Magnus Carlsen. Okay, why did he do this? What is going on? Well, here, the king has to move. You can technically block the check with bishop f7 or rook c7, but you don't have to be a very stable chess genius like Magnus to know these moves are not good for black. So what can black actually do? Well, he can go king h8, trying to defend. What is white's idea here? Well, what white would like to do is something like bishop d6 to e5, hitting the king. The problem with that is Hikaru could win the pawn immediately. So what you do is h4, a shocking move. What's the idea? It's very simple. You're trying to clog up the h-file. If black does nothing, you take the pawn and win the game. If black takes the pawn, here's the problem. Now we go bishop d6 and then bishop b5, force the king over, and then go h7, h8. And look at this. The rook cannot counterattack on the h-file as the h-file is clogged up by his own pawn. Whereas here, if white went bishop d6, black would be able to take and have pressure on the h-file. But after h4, g takes bishop d6, that is not the case. It's mind-boggling stuff. All right, what about king to g8 instead? Well, there, it's just h7, king to h8, bishop d6, followed by there, and that's checkmate. What about king to, let's see, g8? We haven't covered that yet. Wait, we did cover that. Sorry. What about king g6? In that case, rook g7 hits the king, king to f6, and then again h4. This move here, if you don't take, white takes and wins the game. If you do take, you can't go rook h2 and defend on the h-file. White goes h7, and he wins the game. And for that reason, back here in this position, after the blunder, bishop to a2, Hikaru resigns to Magnus. What a shocking conclusion to this game. And let's dive right into our second game. This is the consolation match for third and fourth place, played between Fabiano Caruana and Vincent Keymer. And in this game, for day number 1, Vincent Keymer is playing as white. And Vincent is, I mean, he's very good in classical chess. He's the #1 rated German player in the world. But in freestyle, this guy is so creative, so strong. Even Magnus has given this guy credit as being one of the best freestyle players right now. All right. Same position as in the grand finals for first and second place. Again, the big feature being the queens and the bishops on these long diagonals. So how does Vincent Keymer want to play this position? Vincent opens c4. Black goes c5. Then we have knight f3, knight c6, and then d4. So breaking in the center, sort of like an English opening again. All right. We have c takes, knight takes, and here, the best line according to the engine, this one's really shocking. The computer wants you to take here, the rook takes, and then you go g5, opening up the attack on the rook. Really, really interesting stuff. Instead, d5 played in the game. Also a logical choice. Now, Vincent, he castles, ignoring all of this tension in the center, just kind of giving a pass to Fabiano Caruana. And Fabiano, he takes the pawn on c4. We have d takes c4, then knight takes c6, rook takes d1, rook takes, and b takes c6. So here, this pawn structure actually occurs quite a bit in certain openings. Actually, in the classical Catalan open, it occurs quite a bit. Now here, black is temporarily up one pawn, but on the other hand, white has a better pawn structure and very good chances to apply pressure on the c-file against these pawns. So overall, I would kind of prefer white here. The computer says it's roughly equal, but from a practical standpoint, it does look like white has just the easier time here overall. Just in my camera here. All right. What's going on? White goes g3 in the spirit of the Catalan, opening up the long diagonal. Very logical, pressuring this pawn, pressuring the queen via the X-ray attack. Now this pawn is pinned. If you go c5, you lose the queen and the game. Now, Fabiano castles, knight a3, pressuring that pawn. Very logical. Black goes bishop e6, defending. Now, of course, black, sooner or later, he's probably going to lose that pawn. But what Fabiano's doing, he's just trying to make white's life difficult. If he can just delay losing this pawn for a while, this pawn actually does control a lot of squares, and it does stop the b-file from moving. If white were to go, say, b3 or b4, he would lose that pawn via en passant, and black would be up a pawn potentially for the rest of the game. Therefore, that is, this bishop move, very, very annoying. Just hanging on to the pawn for now. All right, bishop f4, developing his bishop. Queen b7, getting the queen off the back rank, and now queen c1. Very, very subtle, interesting move. Sliding the queen over, pressuring c4 yet again. Now, does black want to defend that? It turns out, yes, he does. Queen to a6 was played in the game, but I do want to point out, for you computer aficionados, g5 is technically the strongest move here. The idea being if white takes on g5, you open up this line of attack for the bishop, win that pawn, hit the queen, hit the knight. White must go queen e3, and it's a complicated game. Instead, queen to a6 played in the game after queen c1. So queen c1, queen to a6. Again, black is defending the pawn on c4 at all costs. Very solid. And now we have bishop e5. Okay, Vincent, again, showing his creativity here. Going bishop f4 to e5, and maybe later to say c3, where it opposes this bishop on this diagonal. So a pretty solid idea by Vincent, I gotta say. All right, knight f6, bishop f3, g6, queen c3. Both sides kind of slow playing it. There aren't a lot of pawn breaks here. There aren't a lot of good pawn moves you can make yet. Therefore, both sides trying to find the absolute best possible squares for all of their pieces. All right, black, bishop g7. Now we have rook c1. The rook slides over. Bishop h6 attacks the rook on the c1 square with the bishop. Now rook d1, the rook slides over again. Knight d7 attacks the bishop on the e5 square. Now we have knight takes c4, queen takes a2, knight to a5. The knight jumps up, knight takes e5, queen takes, and queen to a4. Now here, black has the bishop pair. That should be good for black. However, white has some pretty good squares for his pieces. This bishop on the long diagonal pressuring c6, very strong. This knight on the rim, believe it or not, it is not dim at all. It's actually pressuring c6, and it is defended by the queen. And if black were to try and get rid of the queen on this square, you drop the bishop. And this rook on d1, also very, very strong. Of course, white's going to have to defend the rook right now. The move queen a4 does target the rook, and Vincent does that with the move b3. Look at this. The queen defends the knight defends the pawn blocks the attack on the rook, and the rook controls the d-file. Everything by Vincent here is like coordinating flawlessly. It's really, really, really impressive stuff. All right, Fabiano, queen b5. The queen slides up, and can white win this pawn on the c5, c6 square? Turns out, yes, he can, but instead of doing that right away, Vincent, queen c7, sliding in, and one of the benefits here, you do threaten a7, and you do potentially reduce the mobility of the rook on the back rank. All right, now black, c5, trying to defend. Queen takes a7. Vincent winning, not the pawn I expected, but maybe the pawn we need. Dark Knight reference right there. All right, anyway, bishop g5. E3, king g7. I'm losing character here, Chess YouTube. I just lost character. All right, back into commentator mode. King g2. Vincent bringing his king up. This move turns out is a little bit inaccurate. Turns out instead, moves like maybe knight b7, rook c1, trying to pressure that pawn immediately on c5. It turns out the king is actually maybe a little bit weaker on the g2 square, as the king may be exposed on this long diagonal later. We will see some details about it later in the game. So king g2, this is almost always a good idea. It just doesn't quite work out in this position in this game. All right, black, bishop f6, rook c1, rook c8, h4, alpha 0 time, baby. Well, it turns out no, h5 from black, blocking the alpha 0 pawn, dead in its tracks. All right, Keymer, knight b7, jumping up, pressuring c5 once again. And here, Fabiano finds a very key idea. c4, gaining space on the queen side, trying to liquidate things. And these two bishops are going to be very, very strong if we get some more pieces off the board. All right, b takes. Queen b2, the queen slides down. Rook d1, the rook wasn't under attack, therefore it slides over to the d1 square. Now, rook c7, the rook slides down one file, pressures the queen, and pins the knight on b7. Now we have queen to a8, the queen stepping out of the attack. Bishop takes a4, finally winning that pawn. And here, black is, seemingly having a little bit of an edge. Those two bishops here on f6 and c4 are very, very strong. And according to modern computers and even most modern grandmasters, the bishop pair, meaning when you have two bishops and your opponent has either two knights or a bishop and a knight, something like that, these two bishops are significantly stronger than the bishop and knight or the two knights, and they're worth about half a pawn. The reason being, they can just slice down the board, covering literally every type of square, and it's very difficult to fight against them. All right. Knight d8, sliding back. Bishop b3, rook f1, defending, rook c3. Fabiano really infiltrating here so far. Bishop d5, offering a trade of bishops. And here, black actually allows the trade and plays the move e6. Now, you need to have a good reason to give up the bishop pair like that. You're letting white take on b3. What is black's idea? Well, it turns out bishop takes b3 is, in fact, a good move. The main line goes bishop takes, queen takes, king g1, getting off this long diagonal. And here still, black with, the slightly better minor piece, arguably, the more active queen and rook. Black is doing well here, but white is still hanging in there. I'm actually surprised how big of an edge the computer does give black here. I thought it'd be more closer to equal, but anyway, very interesting. Instead, in this position, you're not going to believe the move that Vincent played here. I mean, this one really rattles my brain. Puzzle time. It's not the strongest move. That is your hint. But sometimes the most shocking move is the most likely at the Grandmaster level. The move here is knight takes e6. This is a clean sack of the knight. You're just giving it up. And what's the idea? Well, black takes the knight, obviously. That's going to happen. If you take the pawn, this bishop has the x-ray defense of the pawn. You can't take it. You lose the bishop. Therefore, instead, queen b7, sliding down, pressuring the king on g7. All right, so far so good. King h6. Now we have bishop takes e6 because now the bishop is pinned to the queen, and white actually has some pressure on that bishop. So, very interesting. But here, black, rook takes e3. And the f2 pawn is also pinned to the king. Fascinating stuff. Even at the GM level, tactics really are the name of the game in terms of who wins and who loses. All right, bishop takes, rook takes, queen f7, rook b7. The rook flies up, pressures that queen on the f7 square. Queen to f8, slides back, hits that king on h6. Where's it going to go? It's going nowhere. Bishop g7 blocks the attack. Queen f4, slides down, hits the king again. King h7 runs out of the attack. And finally, rook e1. This rook has been a really sad piece most of this game. Finally, Vincent trying to get it back into the game, but is it too little too late? Queen a2, queen e4, rook b2, black pressuring on the second rank. What can white do? Queen f3 trying to defend. Queen to a7, finding a new angle to attack. Rook e2, rook b1, black avoids the rook trade. He needs to have as many pieces on the board as possible to attack. Keep in mind here, Vincent, he gave up his knight on e6 for one pawn in the end, meaning black has the extra bishop here. That is no joke. That bishop is very, very strong. It's also a good defensive piece, blocking any sort of future queen attack ideas, rook attack ideas. So black here should have very good winning chances if he can find some sort of way to infiltrate an attack. Let's see what happens. Queen e4, queen to a1, king h2, trying to slide over, and now the queen does guard the h1 square. Before on g2, that was the threat, rook h1, maybe rook h2, and so on. But here, king h2, that square is covered. All right, rook c1, the rook slides over. Queen to f3, the queen slides back. Rook c3, pressuring the queen on the f3 square. Queen to h1, the queen offers the queen trade. Now what? Queen to a6, avoiding the queen trade, trying to keep the attack going. Queen e4, rook c5, rook d2, rook e5, pressures the queen. Queen f3, rook f5, pressures the queen. Queen e4, queen a5, defends the rook. And this dance continues for just a few more moves. Both sides making some shuffling moves, shuffling around, until here, where Vincent Keymer has decided he's finally had enough. And he plays a really shocking idea. So far, he's defending. So far, he's hanging in there. But here, he plays this move. G4? Vincent, what are you attacking? Okay. What's the idea? Well, if black does nothing, you're going to take here, and this pawn will be pinned to the king. So that's one idea, but why are you opening up lines against your own king when you're trying to draw? I don't know. Someone in the comments, let me know what's going on with Vincent. I mean, he's a terrific player, but this move makes no sense to me at all. All right, queen to a5. Rook e3, h takes, queen a2, rook e2, attacking the queen d5, attacking the king, f3, blocking the attack, rook a7, sliding over, threatening ideas like rook to a1. Now we have queen to e4, queen to b5, avoiding the trade, king h2, rook a4, attacks the queen to e7, queen c4, rook e4, attacks the queen, and skewers the queen and the rook behind it. Rook a2, hits the king, the intermediate move against the king. King g3, queen c2, sliding down, and in this position, right here, Fabiano Caruana has defeated Vincent as Vincent resigns on the spot. All right, why did Vincent resign here? Well, the threats are just too much. Queen to h2 is coming, and it's extraordinarily difficult to stop that threat. Very, very, very difficult. From there, the rook slides over. You're pressuring this diagonal, pressuring this file. This pawn controls this square, and effectively, white is getting checkmated, as you can see, mate in 14 moves here. And for that reason, Vincent Keymer, he resigns on the spot to Fabiano Caruana in our second game. Of course, these two battling it out for third and fourth place. And there is a lot of prize money on the line, even for third and fourth place. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars here. So these two are going at it all out. All right, next up, we have Arjun Erigaisi versus the Frenchman, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Maxime is playing as white. Arjun is playing as black. Arjun, as you all know, he's not my favorite Indian superstar, but he is the most bloodthirsty Indian superstar. This guy is a maniac at the chessboard. He will do anything to attack. I mean, out of the top 3 Indian players, we got Gukesh, Arjun, and Praggnanandhaa, I believe. Although Tavatai, that is saying he's coming up. Anyway, Arjun, Gukesh, Praggnanandhaa. Gukesh is definitely the most classical principled player. Arjun is the most insane attacking player you will ever see. He plays sometimes downright dubious ideas just to get an attack going. And Praggnanandhaa is somewhere in the middle, but in my opinion, most dangerous as far as opening preparation. That guy, Praggnanandhaa, every single game, he has this surgical, dangerous idea designed to destroy the opponent, but not quite as insane as Arjun. A little more controlled, a little more of a surgical idea. But anyway, Arjun, the crazy attacking player. It's Maxime is white, Arjun is black. Here, as usual, best moves, d4, c4, g4, and so on. And Maxime, 1d4. Not a very big 1d4 player in classical chess, but here he's playing it in freestyle. And now, Arjun, d5. All right, so far so good. b3, b6, both sides defending these pawns, potentially setting up c5 advances, trying to gain space on the queen side. Now we have knight d3, castles, and g6, opening up pressure on this long diagonal against the queen. Now we have g3, white doing the exact same thing here on this long diagonal. And then we have the move c5, gaining space on the queen side. Now, bishop b2, shadowing that bishop and relieving some of the pressure on this long diagonal. A very logical idea. And here, maybe the first kind of big surprise of the game right here. Arjun, bishop takes d4. Okay. Arjun giving up his very important dark squared bishop. He needs that. He needs it. Not a want. It's a need to defend these dark squares. And without it, I mean, what's going to happen on his king side? But for some reason, the computer says black is better here. I clearly don't understand freestyle chess. All right, anyway. Bishop takes, c takes, queen takes. The queen is centralized. And personally, when I see this, I'm like, wait a minute. Black got no bishop there. The queen centralized. Surely white is better. But no, the computer says black is better here. Again, I do not understand freestyle chess yet. All right, anyway. Knight f6, knight e5, the knight jumps up, bishop b7, black doing a very good job of developing, and now we have rook to d3, the Frenchman transferring the rook on the third rank. Now, knight to a6, potentially wanting to go knight c5 or b4, not a bad idea at all, and it does keep this diagonal open. If black were to go, say, knight c6, that would block this diagonal, so not a bad move at all, I gotta say. And here, the best move to kind of fight against this knight c5 idea is going to be b4 for white. It wasn't played in the game, but that would clamp down there. That would be a good idea. Instead, in the game, rook to c1 was played. Now, decent idea. White may be intending a c4 advance. If white doesn't do that, this move looks a little bit silly, but we'll see what happens. All right, Arjun, knight c5. Sure enough, jumping in, pressuring the rook. Very good square for the knight. Where's the rook going to go? Rook d to d1 played in the game. And then knight e6. The knight completing temporarily. It's very strange looking journey, but sure enough, this knight on e6 pressures the queen, and once the queen moves, this pawn will not be blockaded. So, this pawn right here, it's almost functioning like an isolated queen's pawn. I know it's not quite one. Chess YouTube, don't roast me in the comments for that. Yes, black has a pawn here. Yes, they are connected. Blah blah blah. But really, this pawn, it's very important for white to blockade it, to have some piece, ideally a knight, but also a queen in front of it. But now, with the knight pressuring the queen must move somewhere, and from there, that pawn is going to go marching down the board at light speed. All right, queen b4, the queen slides over. d4, sure enough, that pawn is just really, really annoying. It gains space, it clamps down on e3 and c3, and beyond that, white is going to lose his light square bishop unless he goes f3, and if white goes f3, then squares like e3 will be permanently weakened, so white really doesn't want to do that unless he absolutely has to. But anyway, bishop f3. The bishop jumps up. Now we have knight d5. The knight jumps over. And here, black is pressuring the queen, and white really needs to find the best square for the queen right now. If he doesn't, he's going to be in some serious trouble. So, good time for a strategic puzzle here. Where do you think the best square for the queen is? I'll give you a hint. The top three squares might be queen a4, queen d2, and queen d1. So or queen e1. So find which of these squares is the best square for the queen right here. Turns out queen to e1 is the right square. Very interesting. Instead of that, queen d2 was played. Now, this looks logical. I mean, the queen very often goes to d2. But the problem, Arjun Erigaisi is going to find this really incredible way to get his giant pawn mass rolling down the board. He starts with the move f6, attacking the knight on the e5 square. Now, here, if the knight moves, black can move his knight and set up at e5 ideas. Instead of that, here, Maxime, the Frenchman, a very good tactical player, finds a very good tactical idea. Bishop g4, you first counterattack that knight. Now, the point is, if black takes, you take back, and that is actually incredibly good for white. That'd be a massive blunder, and white would have an advantage. But instead here, Arjun, of course, he sees this. Knight c5, jumping back over to the c5 square. Now we have knight f3, and then e5. And look at this. This pawn chain on the dark squares is actually very, very strong. So it's, it's a very double-edged idea. Double-edged meaning it could be very, very good for black. However, the pawns also could be weak later in the game. So if Arjun is going to gain all the space, he has to back it up and really play precisely and aggressively. Otherwise, Maxime could turn the tables later in the game and expose these pawns as being weaknesses. And if that happens, his king is going to be pretty vulnerable, as there's a lot of space in front of his king here, which could pose some problems later. All right. Maxime, he sees this. Queen to h6, already trying to exploit all of this empty space in front of the king. Obviously, with the pawn on g7, this would not be possible here. All right, now, bishop c8. Black drops back the bishop, offers the trade. We have queen to h4, defending the bishop, and then knight b4, jumping in with the knight and pressuring the a2 square. Now, very importantly, this move was a little bit weaker. Instead, bishop b7, trying to keep that light square bishop alive, would have been the better idea here, but instead, knight b4 played in the game by Arjun. Again, Arjun, just an incredibly aggressive attacking player. I mean, reminds me of the... I had a group call. Actually, one person showed up instead of the usual, 5 or 6, what have you. And he's from India, older gentleman. And that the person I don't want to say his name or anything like that. Let's just call him S. My Indian students. My goodness, this guy is. He gave me a run for his money in some games. He's only rated like 1,500 online, but he played some of the most aggressive openings I have ever seen. He's got a gambit in the bishop's opening that, I've never seen, and that I had a very hard time defending, despite being rated, about 1,900 ELO online. But anyway, I digress. These Indian players, whether they're amateurs that I'm coaching or, in real life, they're quite the hoot. All right, anyway, here, white trades bishops. Bishop takes c8, queen takes c8, and then c3. White finally trying to fight back on the queen side, trying to open up some lines here. Now we have knight takes a2, c takes d4, knight takes c1, rook takes c1, and then e4, driving back that knight. Now both sides ignore the threats on their knights. We trade, and then here in this position, we have e takes and b takes c5. All right, let's slow down. Let's do inventory. What's going on here? It turns out after all of these trades, Arjun Erigaisi, he has 2 rooks versus the rook and knight. Now, I'm not a chess genius by any means, but I know 2 rooks are better than the rook and knight. And here Arjun is going to have tremendous winning chances, tremendous chances to just clean up in the rest of this game. So let's see what happens. Queen c4 slides over the queen, hits the king on the g8 square. The king's got to move. King g7, king g2, rook d4, queen takes c5, gobbling up that pawn. Now we have queen takes, rook takes, and yes, white did win back 1 pawn. But as more and more pieces come off the board, as there's less and less material remaining, these 2 rooks are going to be worth more and more and more relative to the rook and knight. And overall, black here still has tremendous chances. All right. Rook f7, blocking the 7th rank. Of course, white was threatening rook c7, potentially trying to win a pawn. Yes, black could block it, but rook f7, not a bad move at all. Now we have rook a5 attacking that pawn, rook d3 attacking b3, rook b5 defending, and then a6 pressuring the rook. Rook b6, a5, rook b5, rook a7 defending. And now we have h4. The alpha 0 pawn has entered the game, f5, f4, and king to h6. Now these pawns on the king side are pretty much locked up. So the focus of this game, for right now at least, will be on these queenside pawns, I believe. But let's see what happens. Rook b6, rook c7, sliding over, rook a6 pressuring the pawn. Now rook takes, and instead of taking on a5, knight d2. All right, rook b2, knight f1, and now rook c to c2. So Maxime not going for that pawn, instead shuffling his knight over. But now Arjun, you know, there's a phrase for rooks on the 7th rank. They're called pigs because they gobble up all of the pawns. This is from, like, you know, Nimzovich, My System, dating way back. We're talking like, you know, old chess masters. Rooks on the 7th rank or the 2nd rank are called pigs if they're on the opponent's 7th or 2nd. And 2 rooks, I'm not sure what 2 rooks are called. What do you call a gang of pigs? Is there a name for like a tribe of pigs roaming around? I don't know. There's got to be a word for it. But anyway, these 2 pigs right here, obviously pressuring f2. And obviously, this king is not long for this world. And this game does not last much longer. Knight e3, rook takes, king g1, rook f to e2. And in this position, white just resigns on the spot. And here's why. If the knight goes, say, I don't know, d5, rook b2 is checkmate because the king is just being cut off on these back 2 ranks. So what can white do right here? I mean, maybe he tries rook to you know, e5 here. But then again, rook e1 is checkmate. Maybe he tries knight f1, trying to defend here. But even there, the checkmate, I mean, you have a few ideas. For example, you can try over the king, go rook f2 here. And overall, white is just getting blown off the board. There's not much he can do. So anyways, overall, Arjun Erigaisi, a very well-deserved victory over Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. I believe they're playing for 5th and 6th place. Now, next up, we have Abdusattorov versus Jan Nepomniachtchi. But don't worry, the Praggnanandhaa game, I mean, you don't want to miss a Praggnanandhaa game. That is coming up last, so make sure you stick around for that as well in Game 5. This is Game 4. We have Nodirbek Abdusattorov versus Jan Nepomniachtchi, the Russian Grandmaster versus, what is Nodirbek? Nodirbek, is he Czech from the Czech Republic, or is he Polish? He might be Polish. Someone correct me if he's Polish or Czech or what have you. But Jan is Russian, and these 2 are facing off for 7th and 8th place. Now, exact same starting position. They're trying to give white and black the same relative advantage, so it makes a lot of sense. Here we have c4, then c5, knight c3, knight c6, g3, g6, d3, bishop g7. Castles. So far, it is basically an English opening. I mean, both sides basically following, you know, mainline development schemes in the English opening after c4, c5, and so on. So very interesting. All right, now, Nodirbek. Nodirbek is a lot like Arjun Erigaisi, in my opinion. Both highly creative, both seem to despise modern opening theory, both extremely aggressive, and both play literally anything in the first few moves to win the game. He goes bishop g5, a good square for the bishop, and white may be intending queen c1. We saw a similar idea by Vincent Keymer in the first game of this video, pressuring h6, trying to potentially trade off those bishops here, so that could be a good idea. Now, black, f6, driving back that bishop. We have bishop e3, dropping back, d6, knight c2, bishop h3, pressuring the rook on the f1 square here. Good move by black. Rook f to e1, sliding over, and then f5. Now, finally, queen c1. Sure enough, the queen slides over, and white's idea is bishop h6, trying to trade off those bishops. Now, black, in this kind of structure, as we're going to see, black is most likely at some point going to go e5. That's kind of the idea here, and it's sort of this imbalanced pawn structure. White has less space. However, he's going to get the very important d5 square as a whole. Meanwhile, black has to tolerate this very strong knight, but in return, he gets very mobile, strong pawns. So it's a very imbalanced position, both sides having their strengths and weaknesses. So it'll really come down to who can navigate these complications better. All right, queen c8. The queen slides over. Bishop g5. The bishop goes back to the g5 square, knight f6, and sure enough, knight d5, jumping in. So white getting that beautiful d5 square for the knight. If black takes here, white can recapture with the bishop or the pawn, and both moves are pretty playable. But instead, sure enough, e5 is played, and now we do have really this key pawn structure here. So again, white having the very strong knight there. The knight may go to, say, e3, defending d5, and so on. But meanwhile, black having a very large space advantage in the center. So, very interesting trade-off. Now, here, white goes b4, a common idea in these symmetrical English positions, trying to apply pressure on the c-pawn. Now we have rook d to e8. And here, Nodirbek, he's got a pretty simple way to sort of simplify the game and get a really terrific position. And all he has to do is trade twice on f6, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and then go queen to a3, pressuring a7, pressuring b4, pressuring c5, and white here would have a great game. Instead, he goes queen to a3 immediately, and the drawback of this, if black didn't have these kingside pieces, that really does diminish his attacking chances, and it really does weaken black's kingside. So this is kind of letting black off the hook. And here, black can trade on d5. That would be a very good move for him. That would give black very good chances. Instead, f4 played in the game. And this move right here by black is, it really does let white off the hook. Here, white takes on f6. Black takes back. And then white says, you know what? I'm just going to take this c5 pawn, if I can draw arrows correctly. Queens don't go that way. They go this way. Anyway, b takes, d takes, and queen takes c5, winning that free pawn. And here, white is up a pawn. And what does black have here? What does Jan have here? I mean, Jan Nepomniachtchi, he doesn't have a whole lot. The attack on the king side isn't really going anywhere. Black goes bishop d8, trying to defend, and it's a good idea keeping that bishop alive. But overall, Jan here in a little bit of trouble. All right, Nodirbek, rook b1, sliding the rook over, king g7, bishop e4, b6, queen b5, sliding over, f takes, h takes, and then finally, Jan, h5, trying to get some sort of attack on the king side. Now, this makes a lot of sense. Black's idea, in the spirit of Alpha Zero, going h5, h4, trying to soften up the king side and so on. But is it too little too late? Well, let's see. Here, Nodirbek, he's got a pretty simple but really creative way to just totally shut down the attack. Now, normally, if you want to properly shut this down, you would go h4 here, just completely blockading the h-pawns. But white obviously doesn't have an h-pawn, so that's not possible. But what he can do, this did not happen in the game, but what he can do is this move f3. The idea being, if black goes h4, you go g4. And here, there's no en passant as the pawn move one square at a time. And this kind of blocks out the bishop. White may even go king h2 trying to win it. And if black ever trades on g4, then swoops into the queen, white can always go bishop g2 defending. And white's kind of got everything under control. So that would be a really good way to go. Instead, in the game after h5 by Jan, the move is c5. And this move is quite a bit weaker because here black just goes h4. And black suddenly has a pretty good attack on the king side. All right, white here. Knight takes b6. The idea being you open up the discovered attack of the bishop on the knight. Therefore, white is not losing a piece. We have queen g4. Jan ignores the queen side and just goes for the attack. I quite like this. The computer says it's not very good, but in a practical game between two humans, you want to attack. It's a great move in my opinion. Anyway, queen takes c6, rook e6, attacks the queen, queen d7, rook f7. And now the queen seemingly has to go somewhere, and the bishop on d8 is seemingly just hanging here. And white theoretically could just win that with queen takes d8, but instead, what white does here, white plays the move knight d4. What is white doing? This looks completely insane. The queen is under attack. White goes knight d4. And I gotta say, I'm wondering if there was an error in transmission here. I'm wondering, these are the official chess.com moves, but I am wondering if these were the actual moves played in the game. Because here, black can win the queen, but he doesn't do that. I want to show you the main line. The main line here goes rook takes d7, knight takes e6, hitting the king with check, the queen takes, the knight takes, the queen takes, then you go rook b7, pinning the queen to the king, black blocks, and then rook eb1. And here in this position, it's technically even material. Black has a queen, 2 bishops. White has 2 rooks, a bishop, and a lot of pawns. And technically the game is about level. But instead of all this, going way back here, black goes rook f to e7. Completely bizarre. Someone let me know, is this the real move played in the game? All right, from here, we have queen takes e6, rook takes e6, knight takes, queen takes, and then the move knight d7, which seemingly gives up the knight, and black ignores it and plays this move h takes g3 to get the attack going. I am so confused. Let's keep going. F takes, queen takes d7, rook b7, trying to pin the queen to the king on the g7 square. Bishop c7. And from here, I think these are the main moves. Those may, in fact, have been the moves. They're just so crazy, I can't wrap my head around them. Again, let me know what you thought of Game 4 so far, because this move is just like, you know, it's really bizarre. Anyway, rook eb1, the rook slides over, king to h6, rook takes a7, bishop g4, rook a6, bishop f5, bishop takes, queen takes, and rook to f1. The rook slides over, attacks the queen on the f5 square. So far, so good. Now, queen g4. The queen slides down. Rook f to f6, pressuring the pawn on the g6 square. Queen takes e2. Rook takes g6. King to h5. Rook a to f6. Queen takes d3. a4. Bishop d8. Rook d6. And now here, white has the attack on the queen and the bishop, seemingly winning that. But of course, black has some pressure on the rook. Therefore, if white were to take later, the king takes the rook and black is winning. So queen to e2. Again, no risk of rook takes d8 as the king would win the rook. White goes king to h1. Now bishop g5. Jan closing in on the attack. c6. Queen f1. King h2. And now the final move of the game. Bishop e3. And in this position, Jan Nepo, he wins the game as Nodirbek resigns on the spot. And here's why. The mating attack is coming. It's going to be just vicious here. And white is going to be blown off the board. For example, if white wastes a move, it's really simple. Bishop g2, king h1, bishop f2, king h2, queen g1, king h3, queen h1, and it's going to be checkmate. And for that reason here, Nodirbek resigns on the spot to Jan. And finally, going into the final game of today, it is my favorite player. You know him. You'll love him. Everyone's favorite Indian superstar, Praggnanandhaa, versus the always creative player, Richard Rapport. And these guys are facing off, I believe, for 9th and 10th place. All right. Let's see what happens here. All right, in the game here, Praggnanandhaa is playing as white. He opens 1c4, and again, the key feature of this position is the queens and the bishops, both sides trying to unlock their pieces as quickly as they can to get these pieces flying down the board. Black does the same, c5. Now b3, very logical, activating the queen as well. Black goes knight f6, trying to relieve some of that pressure on this long diagonal. And now we have knight to e3, and then the move here, very interesting, rook to e8. We saw who played this move as well. Was it Fabiano Caruana who played this move against Magnus in the semifinals? I think it might have been. The idea being, if white goes knight d5 or f5, that pawn on e7 will be vulnerable. So this is a direct reaction against knight to e3, threatening knight f5, for example. But is it really necessary this quickly? Now, of course, if black doesn't do that and white goes there and then wins that pawn, that is actually technically a checkmate. So that is part of the reason why, black would do it. But anyways, I digress. In the game, rook e8 played, bishop b2 for Praggnanandhaa, and then here, Richard Rapport, knight e6. Now we have knight d3, both sides bringing out their knights. And now Richard, the first one to really mix things up, b5, expanding on the queen side. The point being, if white takes, that pawn will be super, super vulnerable. It will likely be lost, and black will have a little bit better center control without that c pawn. And that is what happens. C takes b5, and of course, Richard goes d5, gaining space. But Praggnanandhaa, he's not afraid. This guy knows what he's doing. He goes bishop e5, offering the trade of bishops. Now, if black takes on e5, white can win back with either the knight or, maybe even better, the queen, centralizing it. Therefore, Richard, he has to find something else. And he goes for the move a6. So, sort of a Benko Gambit style move. You know the Benko Gambit after, say, d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, b5. This is sort of in the spirit of the Benko Gambit. Black is giving up a pawn outright on the queen side, but in return, he will get pretty good compensation. Number one, in terms of these open files on the A file and the B file. And number two, this very good pawn center here. And number three, very good diagonals for his bishops. So very creative. And Praggnanandhaa, he knows that. He knows if you take the pawn, black's going to get so much activity. Therefore, what he does is he declines it and plays the move b6, saying, you know what? I would rather keep this pawn on the board and let you have your pieces all clogged up than win it and activate your pieces. So I love it. I love it. All right. Bishop b7. Bishop takes, queen takes, rook c1, queen d6, centralizing the queen, queen to e5, offering the queen trade. And here black says, no way, Jose, queen takes b6, winning back that pawn. So now both sides have even material, but black does have a slightly better center, and overall, he should be a little better here. And keep in mind, both sides can castle by keeping their kings where they are and just shifting over their rooks to f1 or f8 whenever they want to. So overall, I gotta say, Richard is a little better here. Praggnanandhaa, of course, has his chances. All right, white castles, black goes knight d7, and now the queen is under attack. And where does Praggnanandhaa move it? Well, the best square, according to the engine, is queen g3. But instead, Praggnanandhaa finds the Hikaru queen move, queen to h5. And again, I call it the Hikaru queen because Hikaru, back in his youth, he used to love playing e4, e5, and then queen to h5. So I call it the Hikaru queen. All right, knight d4. The knight jumps in. Then we have rook f to e1. Obviously, white must defend that e2 square in advance. And black goes e5. And now look at this. Black getting three really, really strong pawns here in the center. Praggnanandhaa is in a bit of trouble. All right, Praggnanandhaa, queen h3. The queen drops back. Queen d6, black centralizes. Then we have knight f5. Then knight takes, and then queen takes f5. Now we have g6 driving back that queen on the f5 square. Queen to g5. The queen slides over. And then we have the move short castles. Let's see, how do you do it here? Short castles, that's how you do it. Anyway, h4 and then a5 by Richard, gaining space on the queen side. And here, Praggnanandhaa is going to start to fight back. It turns out this move a5 was a little bit weak. Instead of that, moves like perhaps e4 or f5 were a little better, gaining more space, continuing the pawn march down. Instead, a5, and again, a little bit slow by Richard. And Praggnanandhaa, queen g3, getting out of the way of these pawn advances potentially, and also pressuring e5. Now we have f5, e3, bishop a6, pressuring the knight, and Praggnanandhaa h5, the alpha 0 move, pressuring g6. White may take on g6, or he may even go h6 himself later in the game. Now, here, Richard, the best move is probably going to be king to h8. Obviously, you can't take the pawn right now as that pawn is pinned to the king. So king h8 slides out of the attack and gives black a pretty good position. Instead, c4 played in the game, and this is really problematic for black. Here, Praggnanandhaa, he punishes this, b takes, d takes, and then knight b2 slides back and pressures the pawn. And this is where Richard really, really messes up in this game. He blunders and makes really a shocking mistake. Black has a lot of options here. Queen b4 is good. Rook c8 is good. Queen e6 is good. Knight b6 is good. But instead of those, Richard, he goes queen takes d2. The problem with this move, this queen is about to be trapped, and Praggnanandhaa finds the way to do it. If you like puzzles, pause the video and find the way for Praggnanandhaa to trap the queen. And no, it is not rook d1 right away, as then queen to e2 would run away with the queen, and black would be relatively fine. And no, it is not rook d1, as then the queen would simply capture on b2, winning that knight, and black would obviously be fine. That is your one hint from me. All right, the key sequence here, knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, rook d1, skewering the queen and the knight behind it. The queen goes to e2, rook takes d7, and now look at the attack that Praggnanandhaa suddenly has in this position. The rook cuts off the back rank. That's dangerous. The alpha 0 pawn, that's dangerous. The queen hitting that. The rook having potential access to c7. The bishop slicing down on all of these pawns. Now, when you're attacking, there's actually a principle of attacking. You know, sometimes you attack the weak point in the enemy position, and sometimes you actually attack the strongest point in their position, that being their strongest pawn defensive area. And if you can do that and break through, their entire position shatters. And that is about to happen right here. Black goes rook d7, or rook d8, sorry, attacking the rook. And here white ignores that, and he goes bishop takes f5, basically overloading here. And if the rook takes, you win this rook. If the rook takes here, you take back. And beyond that, white is just crashing through on this strong point of black. And black is in a lot of trouble. Again, he can't take the bishop with the pawn, as the queen pins the pawn to the king. This is just a nasty idea by Praggnanandhaa. We have rook takes, bishop takes a2, and then h takes g6. The pawns in front of the enemy king are being blown away by Praggnanandhaa. Queen b2 attacking the rook. Rook c6, jumping up to the 6th rank. Obviously, h takes would be virtually suicide here for black. He can't do that. Instead, e4 is the move. Praggnanandhaa, bishop f5, giving up this bishop on f5, knowing if black takes it, the attack against the king is going to decide the game on the spot. So instead, a4 played. Now rook c7, rook e8, and then g7. Praggnanandhaa pushing the pawn, forcing the king to be pretty much stuck here. The king cannot move, which means if the king comes under check, it will be all over. Now black goes bishop f7, and here Praggnanandhaa, he finds the finishing blow here to really seal the deal and win the game. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key attacking idea for Praggnanandhaa right here. And of course, the sequence, it starts with the move bishop takes h7. Brilliant move, winning the pawn, forcing the king off the back rank. The king literally must take. Then you go g8, promoting to a queen. Black takes. Then Praggnanandhaa, queen to h4. The king goes to g7, then queen g5, the king goes back, and then the last move, queen to e7. And here, the king must go here, then you take on f7, hit the king again, and obviously, black is not long for this world. If he goes back here, you deliver a checkmate. If black instead goes here, you can just take the rook, and you're winning. And for that reason, back in this position right here, Praggnanandhaa, he wins the game as Richard Rapport resigns on the spot as black. Wow, what a game between Praggnanandhaa and Richard Rapport. I mean, all of these games featuring Magnus, Hikaru, Arjun Erigaisi, you know, on and on and on, all of these games. Praggnanandhaa, really, really fascinating stuff all around. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, comment down below what you thought of the video. You know, anything about it, feel free to roast me, whatever you want to do, and smash that like button. And if you want to learn directly from me, I do offer free group coaching, a growing chess course, and so on at my free chess community. The link is in the description below, so check it out, and I'll see you in the next video. And by the way, guys, whether you join my community or not, whether you watch my videos or not, I sincerely wish you the best of luck on your chess improvement journey. Chess is a beautiful game. You know, if you want to get better at chess and learn the game, it really is a beautiful, beautiful pastime. So I do wish you the best of luck on all of your chess endeavors, whether it's getting better, whether it's enjoying the game, whether it's just having fun with it, whatever it is, best of luck, and I'll see you in the next video.